The research station hung in space like a metal flower, its petals spread wide around a dying star. Inside its sterile white corridors, Overseer Vixtar moved with the slow, deliberate grace of her kind. Her crystalline body caught the artificial light and split it into rainbow patterns on the walls. She had lived for 400 years, but today she felt ancient and tired. The holographic display in front of her showed the same thing it had shown for 3 centuries. A fracture. A break in the most important weapon the galaxy had ever known. The Titan's fist sat in the center of the station, massive and silent, its power core dark and useless. Vixtar touched the display with one translucent finger. The image zoomed in, showing the damaged conduit in impossible detail. The break existed in multiple dimensions at once, a wound in reality itself. Every species in the Galactic Council had tried to fix it. The Kalfaran, with their mastery of crystal technology. The Arankai, who could manipulate individual atoms. The synthesis minds, who thought in pure mathematics. All had failed. Beyond the station's reinforced walls, the Void Swarm was growing. It had already consumed 17 star systems, turning them into nothing but empty darkness. Millions of beings had died, their worlds simply ceasing to exist. The swarm moved faster with each system it devoured, and projections showed it would reach the galactic core within 2 years. The Titan's fist was the only weapon ever created that could stop it. The progenitors, that mysterious ancient race, had built it 10,000 years ago for exactly this purpose, and it was broken. Dr. Thessian entered the chamber, her 7 arms carrying data tablets and analysis tools. She was the lead engineer, a position she had held for 70 years. Her exoskeleton gleamed with the polish of someone who spent more time in laboratories than in the field. "Any progress?" Vixtar asked, though she already knew the answer. "The quantum-level diagnostics are complete," Thessian replied, her voice carrying the harmonics of frustration. "The fracture exists across 11 dimensions simultaneously. Every time we attempt to seal it in one dimension, it expands in another. It is as if the weapon itself resists repair." Vixtar nodded slowly. She had heard this before, in different words, from different experts. The conclusion was always the same: impossible. "The human delegation arrives today," she said, changing the subject. Thessian's primary arms made a dismissive gesture. "The humans, they have been in space for barely a century. What could they possibly contribute? Protocol requires we allow them to tour the facility. They are provisional members of the Council now." Provisional, Thessian repeated, putting emphasis on the word. "They still use chemical rockets for some of their vessels. They weld metal with heat and sparks, like primitives. They are children playing with tools they do not understand." Vixtar did not disagree, but she was too tired to argue. "Nevertheless, they come. Show them the courtesy due to any council species." The human delegation arrived 3 hours later. Vixtar watched them exit their shuttle with the curiosity she might give to an exotic animal. They were small compared to most species, their bodies soft and vulnerable looking. They wore environment suits even though the station's atmosphere was perfectly breathable for them. Caution, perhaps, or fear. The lead diplomat was a woman named Sarah Chen. She spoke the common trade language with a thick accent, her translation implant struggling with some of the more complex concepts. Behind her came scientists, cultural observers, and someone the manifest listed as a structural inspector. This last human caught Vixtar's attention. He was older than the others, his face lined with what she had learned were called wrinkles. His name was Jake Reeves, and unlike the others in their crisp diplomatic uniforms, he wore work clothes with stains and patches. He carried a worn bag over one shoulder, and walked with the slight stiffness of someone who had spent years doing physical labor. The tour proceeded as planned. The humans asked polite questions. They expressed appropriate awe at the Titan's fist, that enormous weapon that filled the station's central chamber. Its surface was covered in the flowing script of the progenitors, words in a language no one could fully translate. The weapon was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, all smooth curves and hidden power. When they reached the damaged section, Thessian began her standard explanation. She spoke of quantum matrices and dimensional harmonics, of the failed attempts at molecular reconstruction and force field welding. The human scientists nodded and took notes, understanding perhaps half of what she said. Jake Reeves stepped closer to the exposed conduit. He did not ask permission. He simply walked up to it and stood there, staring. His eyes moved slowly across the fracture, following lines only he seemed to see. "Can I touch it?" he asked. Thessian's translator took a moment to process the simple question. "Touch it? The quantum field would—" "Is it safe to touch?" Jake asked again, his tone patient. "Yes, but there is no point. We have full scans of every—" Jake reached out and ran his fingers along the edge of the fracture. His eyes half closed, his head tilted slightly. To Vicstar, it looked almost like prayer, or perhaps like someone listening to music only they could hear. "This happened while it was firing," Jake said. Thessian's arms rippled with what Vicstar recognized as suppressed annoyance. "Yes, the historical records indicate the weapon fractured during its final use against a void incursion 10,000 years ago." "Thermal shock," Jake muttered. He pulled a small light from his bag and shone it along the fracture line. "See here? The metal crystallization pattern. This wasn't a clean break. The whole thing was under massive stress, probably overheating, and then something hit it cold. Fast temperature change." "We are aware of the fracture mechanics," Thessian said, her voice tight. Jake straightened up and looked at her. "Can I see your repair attempts? The documentation?" "Our methods would be beyond your technological understanding." "Maybe," Jake agreed easily. "But I'd still like to see them." Vicstar found herself intrigued despite her exhaustion. There was something in the human's tone. Not arrogance, but confidence. The kind that came from doing, rather than theorizing. "Show him," she said. Thessian's primary arm stiffened, but she complied. The holographic records appeared in the air. 3 centuries of failed attempts displayed in painful detail. Force field welding that caused cascade failures. Molecular reconstruction that resulted in structural collapse. Quantum healing that worked in some dimensions, but created larger fractures in others. Jake watched it all, his weathered face expressionless. When the display ended, he was quiet for a long moment. "You've been trying to fix it perfectly," he finally said. "The weapon must be restored to original specifications." "No," Jake said, shaking his head. "You've been trying to make it like it never broke. That's not the same as making it work." Vicstar leaned forward. "Explain." Jake turned to face the Titan's fist, his eyes on that impossible fracture. "Where I come from, we fix things that are broken. We don't make them new again. We make them strong enough to do the job. Sometimes that means accepting the damage and building around it." "Primitive field repairs," Thessian said dismissively. "Maybe," Jake said again. He looked at Vicstar, and his eyes held something she had not seen in 3 centuries of failure. "Hope. But if you're interested, I think I can get this thing working again." The conference room was designed for 20 different species, with accommodations for varying gravity preferences, atmospheric needs, and seating arrangements. Jake sat in a standard human chair, feeling small among the assembled experts. Vicstar presided from her elevated platform, her crystalline form refracting the harsh white lights. Dr. Thessian had positioned herself directly across from Jake, her 7 arms folded in what he had learned was a posture of skepticism. "You claim you can repair the Titan's fist," Vicstar said. It was not a question. "I think so," Jake replied. "I'd need to run some tests, take some measurements, but yeah, I think I can." A ripple of sound moved through the room. It took Jake a moment to recognize it as laughter. Not friendly laughter, the kind that came when someone said something absurd. Thessian leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, I do not wish to be discourteous, but you must understand the scope of what you are claiming. The finest minds in the galaxy have attempted this repair for 3 centuries. Beings who have spent their entire lives studying progenitor technology. Beings whose understanding of physics and engineering surpasses your species' entire scientific knowledge base." "I understand that," Jake said calmly. "And yet you believe you can succeed where they have failed?" "Different background, different approach," Jake said with a shrug. "Sometimes fresh eyes help." A Keltharan engineer named Zix spoke up from the back. He was young by his species standards, barely 80 years old. "What is your specific plan, human Jake?" Jake appreciated the direct question. "I want to sisterplate it." Silence. Then Thessian's translator implant made a small confused sound, as if unsure it had understood correctly. "Sisterplate?" Vixtar asked. "Yeah. It's a shipyard technique. When you have a structural member that's cracked or fractured beyond simple welding, you don't try to fix the crack directly. You add reinforcement on either side, connecting to the good material, and let those new pieces carry the load. The crack is still there, but it doesn't matter anymore, because you've given the stress somewhere else to go. You wish to attach additional material to a progenitor quantum conduit," Thessian said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "Material that would interfere with the dimensional harmonics. Material that would create cascade failures throughout the entire weapon system." "Maybe," Jake said. "Or maybe not. Have you tried it?" "We do not try random approaches. We calculate, we simulate, we model every variable before implementing any solution." "And how's that been working out?" The question hung in the air. Several of the assembled experts made sounds of indignation, but no one could argue with the reality. 300 years of calculation and simulation had produced nothing but failure. Vixtar raised one crystalline hand for silence. "Mr. Reeves, help me understand your reasoning. What do you see that we do not?" Jake stood and walked to the holographic display. He manipulated the controls clumsily, unused to the interface, until he could rotate the image of the fractured conduit. "This," he said, pointing to a section near the break. "See these stress patterns in the metal? And here, the way the crystalline matrix has deformed? I've seen this exact pattern in damaged ship hulls. This didn't just break, it failed under operational load. The weapon was firing, probably at maximum power, and this conduit couldn't handle the stress." "We know this," Thessian said impatiently. "Right, but here's what you might not know." Jake zoomed in further, to a section that looked pristine to most eyes. "See these microscopic variations in the material composition? These aren't flaws, they're old repairs." That got their attention. Zix stood up, moving closer to the display. "Old repairs? The progenitors fixed this thing before, probably multiple times. Look here and here. Different alloy compositions, different bonding techniques. Whoever built this weapon, they didn't expect it to stay perfect. They expected it to get damaged and be repaired in the field." Vixtar's form seemed to brighten slightly. "Show me." For the next hour, Jake walked them through his analysis. He pointed out evidence that the automated scanners had flagged as contamination or manufacturing defects. Tool marks that suggested handwork rather than precise machine fabrication. Tolerances that varied slightly from one section to another, indicating multiple generations of maintenance and repair. The progenitors were practical, Jake concluded. They built this weapon to be tough, not to be pretty. Every species in this room has been treating it like a museum piece, trying to restore it to some perfect original state. But maybe it was never perfect to begin with. Maybe it was always a working tool that got fixed and modified over thousands of years of use. Zix examined the data with fresh eyes. If this is true, then our entire approach has been wrong. We have been trying to recreate a theoretical ideal that never existed. Exactly, Jake said. You've been trying to fix it the way you think it should be fixed. I want to fix it the way the progenitors would have fixed it. Quick, dirty, and good enough to do the job. Thessian had been quiet during this exchange, her 7 arms manipulating data streams, running calculations. Now she looked up, and Jake could not read the expression on her alien features. Your proposal violates every principle of progenitor engineering we have established. The materials you wish to use are crude. The techniques are primitive. The quantum simulations show a 97% probability of catastrophic failure. What do the simulations show for doing nothing? Jake asked quietly. No one answered. They all knew. Doing nothing meant the Void Swarm would continue its advance. It meant the end of civilizations. It meant death on a scale beyond comprehension. Vixtar stood, her crystalline body chiming softly as she moved. The council meeting is in 3 days. They will ask for my recommendation on how to proceed with the Titan's Fist project. What should I tell them? Tell them we need to try something different, Jake said. And if you fail? If your attempt damages the weapon beyond any hope of repair? Jake met her eyes, human to alien, across the vast gulf of their different biologies and cultures. Then we're no worse off than we are now. But if I succeed, you'll have your weapon back. You ask for a great deal of trust, human. I know. But trust goes both ways. You're asking me to believe that all of you, with all your knowledge and technology, actually want this thing fixed. That you're not so invested in your own approaches that you'd rather fail the right way than succeed the wrong way. The room fell silent. Jake had touched something raw, a truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. Pride had become an obstacle. Academic reputation had become more important than practical results. Vixtar turned to Thessian. Your opinion, Doctor. Thessian's arms moved in a complex pattern that Jake's translator could not interpret. Finally, she spoke. I believe Mr. Reeves is wrong. I believe his approach will fail, but I also believe we have run out of alternatives. If the Overseer wishes to grant him permission to attempt his repair, I will not object. Zix, the young Keltherin stood straighter. I would like to assist the human if permitted. I wish to learn his methods. Very well. Vixtar looked at Jake. You have 1 week, Mr. Reeves. If you can show meaningful progress in that time, I will authorize a full repair attempt. If not, you will return to your delegation, and we will resume our previous work. Jake nodded. 1 week. I'll need access to the machine shop, basic welding equipment, and whatever materials requisition I put in. You shall have them. As the meeting broke up, Jake felt the weight of what he had agreed to. 1 week to prove that 3 centuries of expert analysis had missed something fundamental. 1 week to show that sometimes the simplest answer was the right one. He looked at the hologram of the Titan's Fist one more time. Somewhere in that ancient weapon was a solution. He just had to find it. And he had to hope that the progenitors, whoever they had been, thought more like a welder than like a physicist. The machine shop was located in the lower levels of the station, a place where maintenance crews worked on the mundane tasks that kept the facility running. Jake had requested it specifically because it had actual tools, not just holographic interfaces and force field manipulators. Real drills, real grinders, real metal stock that he could cut and shape with his own hands. Zix followed him in, ducking through the doorway designed for smaller species. The young Keltherin's crystalline structure gleamed under the workshop lights, casting rainbow patterns on the oil-stained floor. You have worked in places like this before? Zix asked. Most of my life, Jake replied, running his hand along a welding bench. Started as an apprentice when I was 16. That's about 20 in your years, I think. Been working metal ever since. He pulled out a data pad and brought up the scans of the fractured conduit. First thing we need is accurate measurements. Not quantum-level stuff. Just basic dimensions. Length, width, thickness. The kind of thing you can check with a caliper. We have complete scans, Zix said, confused. Yeah, but scans can be wrong. Or rather, scans show what's there, not what's useful. I need to know how much material I can actually work with. They spent the first day taking measurements. Jake used simple tools, some borrowed from the station, and some from his own kit that he had brought from the shuttle. He measured the conduit from every angle, noting down numbers in a worn notebook he kept in his pocket. Zix watched, fascinated by the analog approach. Your species does not trust computers? Zix asked. We trust them fine, Jake said, squinting at a measurement. But computers can only work with what you tell them. Sometimes you need to see things with your own eyes to know what questions to ask. The measurements revealed something interesting. The progenitor conduit had been manufactured to tolerances that were remarkably similar to human industrial standards. Not identical, but close enough that Jake's experience translated almost directly. They built things the same way we do, he muttered. Or we built things the same way they did. Either way, it means they thought about engineering the same way. On the second day, Jake began fabricating the reinforcement brackets. He worked from his own designs, sketched out on paper before being translated into the station's fabrication system. The material he chose was a titanium carbide alloy, something that could handle high temperatures and extreme stress. Dr. Thessian visited that afternoon. She watched from the doorway as Jake operated a metal lathe, cutting precise angles into a bracket. The machine howled and threw sparks, a primitive and violent process compared to the quiet precision of molecular fabrication. You are actually building these by hand, she observed. Mostly, Jake said over the noise. He shut down the lathe and pulled out the piece, examining it critically. The big shapes I can fab, but the final tolerances need handwork. I need to feel how the pieces fit together. This is inefficient. Maybe, but it's reliable. Every piece I make, I know exactly what it can handle, because I made it myself. No trusting someone else's specs or hoping the fabricator was calibrated right. Thessian picked up a completed bracket with two of her arms, turning it in the light. The craftsmanship is adequate, but I do not understand how this will solve a quantum dimensional fracture. It won't, Jake admitted. Not directly. But think about it this way. The fracture exists because the conduit failed under stress, right? All that energy had nowhere to go, so the weakest point broke. My brackets are going to give that energy somewhere else to go. They'll carry part of the load, reduce the stress on the damaged section. You are treating a quantum conduit like a bridge beam. Kind of, yeah. Thessian was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised Jake. Show me how to use the lathe. He spent the next hour teaching her the basics. It was awkward at first. Her 7 arms were an advantage once she got the hang of it, able to manipulate multiple controls simultaneously. But she had to learn to trust her sense of touch, to feel when the cutting tool was biting correctly, to hear when the machine was running wrong. This is not unpleasant, she admitted, holding up her first finished piece. It was rough compared to Jake's work, but functional. There's something satisfying about making things with your hands, Jake agreed. By the third day, word had spread through the station. Other engineers began stopping by, watching the human work. Some were dismissive, seeing only crude methods and primitive tools. But others, like Zix and increasingly Thessian, began to see something different. They saw a philosophy of engineering that had been forgotten in the galaxy's rush toward ever more complex technology. Jake worked long hours, sleeping in a cot he had set up in the corner of the shop. His hands developed new calluses, and his back ached from bending over the workbench. But piece by piece, the reinforcement system took shape. On the 4th day, he made a breakthrough. Jake had been studying the progenitor tool marks that he had noticed in the original scans. He pulled up the station's archive of progenitor artifacts and began comparing the marks. Zix, look at this, he called out. The Caltheran hurried over. Jake had two images side by side. One was from the Titan's fist. The other was from a progenitor mining tool recovered from a dig site 300 years ago. See these scratches? These are tool marks from manufacturing. They're identical, same tool, or at least the same type of tool. But look at the pattern. It's not random. It's consistent, which means the progenitors were doing the same thing I do. I do not understand. They were hand-finishing their work. This wasn't made by a perfect automated system. Some progenitor worker, held a tool and made these marks. They cared about how it felt, not just how it scanned. Jake stood back, a grin spreading across his weathered face. They were builders, real builders, not academics, not theorists. People who got their hands dirty and made things that worked. This realization changed everything. If the progenitors thought like builders, then their design philosophy would reflect that. Jake began to look at the Titan's fist differently. Not as a mysterious alien artifact, but as a piece of equipment made by practical people for a practical purpose. He adjusted his designs accordingly. Instead of trying to match theoretical perfection, he designed for real-world durability. He added redundancy where scans said it wasn't needed, because real-world experience said it was. He left tolerance gaps where precision called for tight fits, because things expanded when they heated up, and contracted when they cooled down. On the fifth day, Thessian brought him something unexpected. It was a data file, heavily encrypted. I have been reviewing the Council archives, she said, looking for any mention of progenitor repair techniques. It was classified 300 years ago and forgotten. Jake opened the file. It was a report from the first team that had discovered the Titan's fist. In it, they described finding maintenance logs in the weapon's computer system. The logs were fragmentary, corrupted by time, but they included something precious: instructions. The instructions were not in the formal progenitor language that covered most of their artifacts. They were in a simpler form, almost like shorthand, and they described repair procedures. Jake read through them twice, his excitement growing. This is a maintenance manual. This is what their repair crews used when the weapon got damaged in battle. I translated what I could, Thessian said. The language is crude compared to standard progenitor text. It's not crude, it's practical. This is how workers talk to each other. Simple, direct, focused on getting the job done. Together, they worked through the manual. Some of it was incomprehensible, lost to time and corruption, but enough remained to confirm Jake's approach. The progenitors had used reinforcement techniques. They had accepted that damage would happen and built their repairs around that reality. One entry in particular stood out. It described a field repair to the exact conduit that was now fractured. The repair had been done 10,000 years ago, during the weapon's final battle. The progenitor repair crew had reinforced the conduit with external plating, almost exactly the way Jake had planned. They already did what I'm trying to do, Jake said quietly, and it worked. The weapon kept firing. Until it did not, Thessian pointed out. Yeah, but it gave them enough time to finish the battle. That's all we need. Enough time to fight the Void Swarm. On the sixth day, Jake assembled the first complete reinforcement bracket. It was a thing of beauty to his eyes, even though he knew the alien engineers saw it as crude. Every weld was perfect. Every bolt hole aligned exactly. Every surface had been hand-finished to the right texture. Tomorrow, he told Vixtar when she came to inspect the work, tomorrow I'll be ready to install it. She examined the bracket with her crystalline sensors, analyzing it from every angle. Your week is not yet over. You have made progress, though I confess I do not fully understand your methods. That's okay, Jake said. I don't fully understand half the stuff on this station. But I don't need to understand everything. I just need to fix one broken pipe. That night, Jake could not sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the workshop ceiling. going over every step of the installation in his mind. He had done work like this thousands of times on ships and stations, but never on something this important. Never with the fate of billions riding on whether his weld held. Zix found him there at 3 in the morning, still awake. "Are you afraid, human Jake?" Jake considered the question. "Yeah, but fear is normal when you're doing something that matters. The trick is not letting it stop you." "I am afraid too," Zix admitted. "Afraid that you will fail and we will have wasted our last chance. But also afraid that you will succeed and prove that we have been wrong for so long." "Being wrong isn't the end of the world," Jake said. "Not learning from it is." "That is wise." "Nah, that's just something my first supervisor told me when I screwed up a weld 20 years ago." They sat together in comfortable silence, human and alien, waiting for the dawn that would bring the moment of truth. The installation began at dawn, though dawn was just a concept on a space station orbiting a dying star. Jake had slept for maybe 2 hours, his mind too busy planning and replanning every step. Now he stood before the Titan's fist, his reinforcement brackets laid out on a clean cloth, his tools arranged in precise order. The observation gallery was full. Every engineer on the station had come to watch, along with the human delegation and most of the administrative staff. Vixtar presided from her platform, her crystalline form reflecting the harsh lights. Dr. Thessian stood beside Jake, ready to assist. Zix hovered nearby, carrying tools and materials as needed. "Whenever you are ready, Mr. Reeves," Vixtar announced. Jake picked up the first bracket. His hands were steady despite the audience. This was just another repair job, just another broken thing that needed fixing. He had done this 1,000 times before. Except he had never done it while the galaxy watched. The first bracket had to be positioned precisely on the intact section of the conduit, just before the fracture point. Jake had measured and remeasured, but now he checked one more time with a simple ruler. The mounting points aligned perfectly. He drilled the pilot holes by hand, the old-fashioned drill whining in the silence of the chamber. "Why not use a laser drill?" someone in the gallery asked. "Lasers are too precise," Thessian answered, to Jake's surprise. "They make holes that are exactly the right size, but metal expands and contracts with temperature. Jake's drill makes holes that are slightly larger, with room for movement." Jake smiled to himself. She was learning. The bolts went in smoothly, each one torqued to the exact specification Jake had calculated. Not too tight, which would create stress points. Not too loose, which would allow movement. Just right, with the feel that came from 30 years of experience. The second bracket went on the other side of the fracture. This was the tricky part. The damaged metal was unpredictable. Too much pressure and it might crumble. Too little and the bracket would not hold. Jake worked slowly, testing each bolt as he tightened it. He could feel the metal responding, settling into the new configuration. The bracket was taking the load, exactly as he had designed it to do. "Quantum scan," Thessian said quietly, running her instruments over the installation. "The dimensional fracture is unchanged. The bracket is having no effect on the quantum matrix." "That's good," Jake said, continuing his work. "Means I'm not making it worse." "But you are not making it better." "Not yet." The next phase was the most critical. Jake had to connect the two brackets together, bridging the fracture with new material. He had designed a custom sleeve that would fit over the conduit, linking the brackets and providing a new path for energy flow. But first, he had to prepare the surface. Jake pulled out a wire brush and began cleaning the progenitor metal by hand, scrubbing away 10,000 years of oxidation and microscopic debris. It was tedious work. Several people in the gallery left, bored by the lack of dramatic action. Zix handed him cleaning solvent. "This seems like unnecessary effort." Jake replied, examining his work critically. "It's the most necessary part. The weld will only be as strong as the bond between the new metal and the old. If there's any contamination, any weakness, the whole thing fails. When the surface was finally cleaned to his satisfaction, Jake set up his welding equipment. He had chosen a fusion welder, the closest thing to the arc welders he used back home. The alien engineers had offered him force field welding, molecular bonding, quantum adhesion. He had turned them all down. "I need to see the puddle," he had explained. Now, wearing a welding helmet he had modified to fit human dimensions, Jake struck an arc. The familiar blue-white light filled his vision. The metal began to melt, forming the puddle he needed to control. His hands moved with practiced precision, feeding filler rod into the weld pool, building up the joint, layer by layer. It was meditation. It was art. It was 3 decades of skill distilled into a single perfect bead of molten metal. The gallery had gone completely silent. Even those who did not understand welding could sense they were watching something special. The human's hands moved with absolute certainty, no hesitation, no second guessing. He knew exactly what he was doing. Jake completed the first weld pass and shut down the torch. He flipped up his helmet and examined the bead with a critical eye. Good penetration, no porosity, a slight ripple pattern that indicated proper heat control. He nodded to himself and began the second pass. It took 4 hours to complete the sleeve installation. 4 hours of careful welding, of building up layer after layer of new metal. When Jake finally set down his torch, his arms ached and his eyes burned from the welding light. But the sleeve was complete. "Quantum scan," Vixtar ordered. Thessian ran her instruments again. This time, her 7 arms went completely still. "This is unexpected." "What is it?" Vixtar asked sharply. "The dimensional fracture has not changed, but the energy distribution has. The new material is creating a bypass around the damaged section. Power can flow through the sleeve instead of through the fractured conduit." "I told you," Jake said wearily. "I'm not fixing the break. I'm giving the energy somewhere else to go." "But the quantum harmonics are all wrong," another engineer protested. "The theoretical models show this should create massive feedback loops." "Then your models are wrong," Thessian said quietly. "The actual measurements show it is working." Jake spent the next 2 hours installing additional reinforcements, stress distributors that would help spread the load across the entire repair. Each piece was custom-fitted, hand-welded, and tested before he moved to the next. By the time he finished, his beautiful alien weapon had what looked like a metal spider web wrapped around its damaged section. It was ugly. It violated every principle of elegant design. And according to Jake's instruments, it was structurally sound. "We need to pressure test it," he said. They pumped coolant through the conduit at increasing pressures. The repair held. They ran electrical current through it. The repair held. They cycled the temperature from near freezing to red hot. The repair held. "It is time," Vixtar announced. "We will attempt a test firing." The Titan's fist was designed to fire in space, its beam capable of crossing light years. For the test, they would run it at minimal power, just enough to activate the full weapon system and see if the repaired conduit could handle the load. The station went to alert status. All non-essential personnel evacuated to safe zones. Jake was offered a spot in the shielded observation area. He declined. "I stay with my work," he said simply. Zix stayed with him. So did Thessian, to Jake's surprise. "If it explodes, we will all die together," she said. Jake could not tell if she was joking. The power-up sequence began. Energy flowed into the Titan's fist, for the first time in 10,000 years. The ancient weapon hummed to life, its systems activating one by one. Lights that had been dark for eons began to glow. The progenitor script on its surface seemed to pulse with inner fire. Jake watched his repair through a radiation shield. The sleeve was heating up, glowing a dull red. The brackets were vibrating slightly as energy flowed through them. This was the moment. If his calculations were wrong, if his welds were weak, if he had missed something critical, the whole thing would fail catastrophically. The energy levels climbed. 50%, 75%, 90%. Alarm klaxons blared. Thessian's instruments were screaming warnings. The quantum sensors showed energy spikes far beyond predicted parameters. "Abort," someone shouted over the communication system. "Abort the test." "Wait," Jake said calmly. "Look at the actual temperatures. Look at the structural readings." Thessian checked her instruments. "The quantum fluctuations are extreme, but the physical structure is stable. Temperature is within acceptable ranges. Vibration is minimal. Your repair is channeling the energy differently than expected," Vixtar said. "The quantum models did not account for this." "Forget the quantum models," Jake replied. "Is it working or not?" 100% power. The Titan's fist reached full activation. Energy blazed through the repaired conduit, taking the path Jake had created for it, flowing through his welds and brackets and reinforcements. And then something impossible happened. Power output exceeding theoretical maximum by 17%, an engineer reported, his voice stunned. "The weapon is running above design specifications." Jake stared at his repair. The energy was not just flowing through this sleeve. It was flowing back, redirecting waste heat and bleed-off energy back into the main firing chamber. His crude human patch had accidentally optimized the weapon's efficiency. The test beam fired. A lance of coherent energy stabbed out into space, crossing 3,000 kilometers of empty void before dissipating. The sensors measured its power, calculated its potential. It was enough, more than enough. The Titan's fist could fight the void swarm. The weapon powered down smoothly. No explosions, no cascade failures, just a clean, controlled shutdown. Jake walked up to his repair and placed his hand on the metal. It was warm, but not dangerously hot. He could feel it settling, the structure finding its equilibrium. "It works," he said simply. Behind him, the observation gallery erupted in chaos. Some were cheering, some were arguing about the quantum readings. Some were already calculating the implications for progenitor engineering theory. Jake just smiled, pulled off his gloves, and sat down heavily on the floor. He was exhausted, filthy, and his entire body ached. But he had done it. Not perfect, never perfect, but good enough. And sometimes, good enough was all you needed. The days after the successful test were strange for Jake. He had expected to be left alone to finish his work, but instead he found himself at the center of attention he did not want. Engineers from across the station came to study his repair. Some brought instruments, some just stared, trying to understand how something so simple could work when their complex solutions had failed. Dr. Thessian spent hours examining every weld, every bracket, every bolt. She ran scans, took measurements, and filled data tablets with analysis. On the third day after the test, she found Jake in the machine shop, cleaning his tools. "I have completed my analysis," she announced. "Yeah?" Jake did not look up from the wire brush he was scrubbing clean. "Your repair should not work. According to every established principle of progenitor engineering, it violates the fundamental design philosophy of dimensional quantum harmonics. But it does work. Yes." Thessian set down her data tablets. With two of her arms, she picked up a wrench from Jake's toolbox, turning it over as if seeing such a tool for the first time. "I have been thinking about this for 3 days. Do you know what I realized?" "What's that?" "I have spent 70 years studying progenitor technology. I can recite their mathematical principles. I can analyze their quantum matrices. I can predict how their systems should behave according to theory, but I have never understood them. Jake finally looked up. Understanding is different from knowing. Yes, I knew what the progenitors built. You understood why they built it that way. Thessian's arms made a gesture Jake had learned meant respect. I was wrong about you, human Jake. I was wrong about your species. I was wrong about what it means to be an engineer. You weren't wrong, Jake said gently. You just had a different perspective. Both are needed. Perhaps. But my perspective alone achieved nothing for 300 years. Over the following weeks, the word spread through the Galactic Council. The human had fixed the Titan's fist, not with advanced technology or brilliant theory, but with simple, practical engineering. The implications rippled outward, like waves from a dropped stone. The council convened a special session. Jake was required to attend, though he would have preferred to avoid it. He sat in the massive chamber, feeling small among the assembled representatives of dozens of species. Vixtar presented the report, explaining what had happened in precise detail. When she finished, a synthesis delegate spoke. Its voice was pure mathematics, translated for those who could not process such thought directly. This raises questions about our technological development philosophy. Have we become too focused on complexity? The human did not succeed because his methods were simple, an Arankai representative argued. He succeeded because he brought a fresh perspective to an old problem. He succeeded, Vixtar interrupted, because he understood something we had forgotten. Technology is not an end unto itself, it is a tool to solve problems. We became so focused on understanding the progenitors' methods that we forgot to ask what problems they were trying to solve. The debate continued for hours. Jake tried to stay quiet, but eventually he was called upon to speak. I don't have any great wisdom, he said, standing awkwardly at the speaker's podium. I just fixed something that was broken. But if I learned anything from this, it's that sometimes you need to step back from the complicated explanations and ask simple questions. Like, what was this thing supposed to do? And how can I make it do that again? A young delegate from a species Jake did not recognize asked, Do you believe your species has something to teach the rest of the galaxy? Jake thought about that. I think every species has something to teach. You all have knowledge and experience that humans don't have. But yeah, maybe we have something too. We're still close enough to building things with our hands that we remember how stuff actually works in the real world, not just in theory. The Council voted to expand humanity's role from provisional member to full member, with a specific mandate. Human engineers would be integrated into research teams across the galaxy, bringing their practical perspective to projects that had stalled. But Jake declined all offers to stay on as chief engineer of the Titan's Fist project. When Vixtar asked him why, he was honest. This isn't my place. I'm a shipyard welder, not a scientist. I did what I could, but now you need people who can take what I started and make it better. People like Thessian and Zix. You could teach them, Vixtar suggested. I already have. They just needed to see that it was okay to trust their hands as much as their minds. Before he left, Jake spent a day with Zix, showing him the finer points of welding technique. The young Keltharan was a quick learner, his multiple arms giving him advantages, once he learned to coordinate them properly. You will return to your Luna station now? Zix asked. That's the plan. Got ships waiting for repairs. Folks depending on me. It seems small after this. Jake smiled. It's not small to the people whose ships I fix. Every job matters to somebody. It was a data crystal, containing all her research on progenitor engineering, translated into human languages and annotated with practical notes. Share this with your people, she said. Perhaps they will see things in this data that I have missed. I'm sure they will, and I'm sure you'll keep finding new things too, now that you're looking at it differently. I have already begun. I assembled a team of mixed species and skill levels. Engineers, technicians, even maintenance workers. We are reviewing every progenitor artifact in our archives. looking for evidence of practical repairs and modifications. Finding anything interesting? Everything is interesting when you ask the right questions. She paused. I wish to apologize again for my initial dismissal of you. Already forgotten, Jake said. You gave me a chance when it counted. That's what matters. The human delegation prepared to depart. Sarah Chen thanked Vixtar formally for the station's hospitality and for the new opportunities opening for humanity. Behind the diplomacy, Jake could see genuine warmth between the species, a respect that had been earned through action rather than just words. As the shuttle pulled away from the station, Jake looked back at the Titan's fist. It sat in its dock, ready for deployment against the Void Swarm. His repair was visible on its surface, a web of human metal grafted onto ancient alien technology. It was not beautiful, but it was strong. News reached them 3 weeks later, while Jake was back at Luna Station working on a damaged cargo hauler. The Titan's fist had engaged the Void Swarm at the edge of the Kepler cluster. The weapon had fired continuously for 6 hours, its beam carving through the darkness, destroying the swarm's leading edge and forcing it to retreat. Jake's repair had held. The weapon had performed above specifications for the entire battle, just as it had during the test firing. The cargo ship captain whose hauler Jake was fixing saw the news and recognized his welder. Hey, isn't that the thing you fixed, that superweapon? Yeah, Jake said, not looking up from his work. That's the one. Damn, you saved the galaxy, man. Nah, I just fixed a broken pipe. Other people are doing the saving. But he smiled as he said it, because he knew it was more than that. He had proven something important. That humanity belonged in the galactic community, not despite their relative primitiveness, but because of it. That fresh eyes and practical experience could solve problems that centuries of study could not. And most importantly, that sometimes the best solution was not the most elegant or the most theoretically perfect. Sometimes the best solution was the one that actually worked. Back at the research station, Zix practiced his welding technique on scrap metal, trying to match the smooth consistency Jake had shown him. Thessian reviewed maintenance logs from progenitor artifacts, finding evidence of field repairs and practical modifications everywhere she looked. The galaxy's entire approach to ancient technology was shifting, becoming less about preservation and more about understanding how to actually use what the progenitors had left behind. And somewhere in the cold dark of space, the Titan's fist stood ready. Its core bore the marks of Jake Reeves's work, a human welder who had done something the greatest minds in the galaxy said was impossible. The reinforcements gleamed under the light of distant stars, a permanent reminder that sometimes innovation came not from advanced knowledge, but from the willingness to get your hands dirty and fix what was broken. The Void Swarm would come again, but now the galaxy had a working weapon to fight it. And more than that, they had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of practical engineering, of trusting experience as much as theory, of remembering that the best technology was the kind that actually did the job it was supposed to do. Jake returned to his workbench, picked up his torch, and struck an arc. The familiar blue-white light filled his vision, and he lost himself in the meditative rhythm of laying down a perfect weld. Just another repair job. Just another broken thing that needed fixing. And in the grand scheme of the galaxy, maybe that was the most important job of all.